Part 1. How You Set the Happiness Trap. Chapter 1. Fairy Tales. What's the last line of every fairy tale? You got it. And they lived happily ever after. And it's not just fairy tales that have happy endings. How about Hollywood movies? Don't they nearly always have some sort of feel-good ending where good triumphs over evil, love conquers all, and the hero defeats the bad guy? And doesn't the same hold true for most popular novels and television programs? We love happy endings because society tells us that's how life should be. All joy and fun, all peace and contentment, living happily ever after. But does that sound realistic? Does it fit in with your experience of life? This is one of 4 major myths that make up the basic blueprint for the happiness trap. Let's take a look at these myths, one by one. Myth number 1. Happiness is the natural state for all human beings. Our culture insists that humans are naturally happy, but the statistics quoted in the introduction clearly disprove this. Remember, 1 in 10 adults will attempt suicide, and 1 in 5 will suffer from depression. What's more, the statistical probability that you will suffer from a psychiatric disorder at some stage in your life is almost 30%. Not exactly great odds, are they? And when you add in all the misery caused by problems that are not classified as psychiatric disorders, loneliness, divorce, sexual difficulties, work stress, midlife crisis, relationship issues, domestic violence, social isolation, bullying, prejudice, low self-esteem, chronic anger and lack of meaning or purpose in life, you start to get some idea of just how rare true happiness really is. Unfortunately, many people walk around with the belief that everyone else is happy except for them. And, you guessed it, this belief creates even more unhappiness. Myth number 2. If you're not happy, you're defective. Following logically from myth 1, Western society assumes that mental suffering is abnormal. It is seen as a weakness or illness, a product of a mind that is somehow faulty or defective. This means that when we do inevitably experience painful thoughts and feelings, we often criticize ourselves for being weak or stupid. Health professionals contribute to this process by readily slapping on labels such as, "You're depressed." And these labels merely confirm how defective we are. Acceptance and commitment therapy is based on a dramatically different assumption. ACT proposes that the normal thinking processes of a healthy human mind will naturally lead to psychological suffering. You're not defective. Your mind's just doing its job, the thing it evolved to do. Fortunately, ACT can teach you how to adapt to this in such a way that your life will be powerfully transformed. Myth number 3. To create a better life, we must get rid of negative feelings. We live in a feel-good society, a culture thoroughly obsessed with finding happiness. And what does that society tell us to do? To eliminate negative feelings and accumulate positive ones in their place. It's a nice theory, and on the surface, it seems to make sense. After all, who wants to have unpleasant feelings? But here's the catch. The things we generally value most in life bring with them a whole range of feelings, both pleasant and unpleasant. For example, in an intimate long-term relationship, although you will experience wonderful feelings such as love and joy, you will also inevitably experience disappointment and frustration. There is no such thing as the perfect partner, and sooner or later conflicts of interest will happen. The same holds true for just about every meaningful project we embark on. Although they often bring feelings of excitement and enthusiasm, they also generally bring stress, fear, and anxiety. So if you believe myth 3, you're in big trouble, because it's pretty well impossible to create a better life if you're not prepared to have some uncomfortable feelings. However, in part 2 of this book, you will learn how to handle such feelings altogether differently, to experience them in such a way that they bother you a whole lot less. Myth number 4. You should be able to control what you think and feel. The fact is, we have much less control over our thoughts and feelings than we would like. It's not that we have no control, it's just that we have much less than the experts would have us believe. However, we do have a huge amount of control over our actions, and it's through taking action that we create a rich, full, and meaningful life. That's why we say ACT as the word act, rather than as the initials ACT. The overwhelming majority of self-help programs subscribe to myth 4. For example, many approaches teach you to identify negative thoughts and replace them with more positive ones. Other approaches encourage the repetition of positive affirmations such as, "Everything that happens is for my highest good and greatest joy," or "I am strong, able, and capable at all times. Still other approaches encourage you to visualize what you want, to vividly imagine yourself the way you want to be, living the life you dream of. The basic theme of all these approaches is this: if you challenge your negative thoughts or images, and instead, repeatedly fill your head with positive thoughts and images, you will find happiness. If only life were that simple. I'm willing to bet that you've already tried countless times to think more positively about things, and yet those negative thoughts keep coming back again and again. As we saw in the last chapter, our minds have evolved over 100,000 years to think the way they do, so it's not likely that a few positive thoughts or affirmations will change them all that much. It's not that these techniques have no effect. They can often make you feel better temporarily, but they will not get rid of negative thoughts over the long term. The same holds true for negative feelings such as anger, fear, sadness, insecurity, and guilt. There are multitudes of psychological strategies to get rid of such feelings, but you've undoubtedly discovered that even if they go away, after a while they're back, and then they go away again, and then they come back again, and so on and so on. The likelihood is, if you're like most other humans on the planet, you've already spent a lot of time and effort trying to have good feelings instead of bad ones, and you've probably found that as long as you're not too distressed, you can, to some degree, pull it off. But you've probably also discovered that as your level of distress increases, your ability to control your feelings progressively lessens. Sadly, Myth 4 is so widely believed that we tend to feel inadequate when our attempts to control our thoughts and feelings fail. These 4 powerful myths provide the basic blueprint for the happiness trap. They set us up for a struggle we can never win, the struggle against our own human nature. It is this struggle that builds the trap. In the next chapter, we will look at this struggle in detail. But first, let's consider why these myths are so entrenched in our culture. The illusion of control. The human mind has given us an enormous advantage as a species. It enables us to make plans, invent things, coordinate actions, analyze problems, share knowledge, learn from our experiences, and imagine new futures. The clothes on your body, the shoes on your feet, the watch on your wrist, the chair beneath you, the roof over your head, the book in your hands. None of these things would exist but for the ingenuity of the human mind. The mind enables us to shape the world around us and conform it to our wishes, to provide ourselves with warmth, shelter, food, water, protection, sanitation, and medicine. Not surprisingly, this amazing ability to control our environment gives us high expectations of control in other arenas as well. Now, in the material world, control strategies generally work well. If we don't like something, we figure out how to avoid it or get rid of it, and then we do so. A wolf outside your door? Get rid of it. Throw rocks at it or spears or shoot it. Snow, rain, or hail? Well, you can't get rid of those things, but you can avoid them by hiding in a cave or building a shelter. Dry, arid ground? You can get rid of it by irrigation and fertilization, or you can avoid it by moving to a better location. But what about our internal world? I'm talking here about thoughts, memories, emotions, urges, mental images, and physical sensations. Can we simply avoid or get rid of the ones we don't like? In the outer world, we can do so fairly easily, so shouldn't it be the same with our inner world? Here's a little experiment. As you keep reading this paragraph, try not to think about ice cream. Don't think about the color or the texture or the taste of it. Don't think about how it tastes on a hot summer's day. Don't think about how good it feels as it melts inside your mouth. Don't think about how you have to keep licking around the edges to stop it from dripping on your fingers. How'd you do? Exactly. You couldn't stop thinking about ice cream. Here's another little experiment. Recall something that happened in the past week. Any memory will do, whether it's a conversation you had, a movie you watched, or a meal you ate. Got one? Good. Now try to get rid of it. Totally obliterate it from your memory so it can never come back to you, ever again. How did you go? If you think you succeeded, just check again and see if you can still remember it. Now, tune into your mouth. Notice how your tongue feels. Run it over your teeth, your gums, your cheeks, and the roof of your mouth. Now try to get rid of those sensations. Try to turn your mouth totally numb, as if you just had a shot of Novocaine from the dentist. Were you able to forget the sensations? Now consider this hypothetical scenario for a moment. Suppose someone put a loaded gun to your head and told you that you must not feel afraid. that if you should feel even the slightest trace of anxiety, they will shoot you. Could you stop yourself feeling anxious in this situation, even though your life depended on it? Sure, you could try to act calm, but could you truly feel it? Okay, one last experiment. Stare at the star below, then see if you can stop yourself from thinking for 60 seconds. That's all you have to do. For 60 seconds, prevent any thoughts whatsoever from coming into your mind, especially any thoughts about the star. Hopefully by now you're getting the point that thoughts, feelings, physical sensations, and memories are just not that easy to control. It's not that you have no control over these things, it's just that you have much less control than you thought. Let's face it, if these things were that easy to control, wouldn't we all just live in perpetual bliss? Of course, there are a few self-help gurus who claim to live in such a state all the time. Such people often get really rich, their books sell by the million, and they attract huge followings of people desperate for the answer. My guess is that many readers of this book will have already gone down that path and been sadly disappointed. How we learn about control. From a young age, we are taught that we should be able to control our feelings. When you were growing up, you probably heard a number of expressions like, "Don't cry," or "I'll give you something to cry about." "Don't be so gloomy. Look on the bright side. Take that frown off your face. You're a big boy now. Big boys don't cry. Stop feeling sorry for yourself. Don't worry, there's no need to be frightened." With words such as these, the adults around us sent out the message again and again that we ought to be able to control our feelings, and certainly it appeared to us as if they controlled theirs. But what was going on behind closed doors? In all likelihood, many of those adults weren't coping too well with their own painful feelings. They may have been drinking too much, taking tranquilizers, crying themselves to sleep every night, having affairs, throwing themselves into their work, or suffering in silence while slowly developing stomach ulcers. However they were coping, they probably didn't share those experiences with you. And on those rare occasions when you did get to witness their loss of control, they probably never said anything like, "Okay, these tears are because I'm feeling something called sadness. It's a normal feeling, and you can learn how to handle it effectively." But then, that's not too surprising. They couldn't show you how to handle your emotions because they didn't know how to handle theirs. The idea that you should be able to control your feelings was undoubtedly reinforced in your school years. For example, kids who cried at school were probably teased for being crybabies or sissies, especially if they were boys. Then, as you grew older, you probably heard phrases, or even used them yourself, such as, "Get over it! Shit happens! Move on! Chill out! Don't let it bother you! Don't be such a chicken! Snap out of it!" And so on. The implication of all these phrases is that you should be able to turn your feelings on and off at will, like flicking a switch. And why is this myth so compelling? Because the people around us seem, on the surface, to be happy. They seem to be in control of their thoughts and feelings. But seem is the key word here. The fact is that most people are not open or honest about the struggle they go through with their own thoughts and feelings. They put on a brave face and keep a stiff upper lip. They are like the proverbial clown crying on the inside. The bright face paint and chirpy antics are all we see. It's common in therapy to hear clients say things like, "If my friends/family/colleagues could hear me now, they'd never believe it. Everyone thinks I'm so strong/confident/happy/independent." Penny, a 30-year-old receptionist, came to see me 6 months after the birth of her first child. She was feeling tired and anxious and full of self-doubt about her mothering skills. At times, she felt incompetent or inadequate and just wanted to run away from all the responsibility. At other times, she felt exhausted and miserable and wondered if having a child had been a huge mistake. On top of that, she felt guilty for even having such thoughts. Although Penny attended regular mothers' group meetings, she kept her problems a secret. The other mothers all seemed so confident. She feared that if she told them how she was feeling, they would look down on her. When Penny eventually plucked up the courage to share her experiences with the other women, her admission broke a conspiracy of silence. The other mothers had all been feeling the same way to one degree or another, but they'd all been putting on the same act of bravado, hiding their true feelings for fear of disapproval or rejection. There was a huge sense of relief and bonding as these women opened up and got honest with one another. To make a gross generalization, Men are much worse than women at admitting their deepest concerns because men are taught to be stoic, to bottle up their feelings and hide them. After all, big boys don't cry. In contrast, women learn to share and discuss their feelings from a young age. Nonetheless, many women are reluctant to tell even their closest friends that they are feeling depressed, or anxious, or not coping in some way, for fear of being judged weak or silly. Our silence about what we are really feeling, and the false front we put on for the people around us, simply add to the powerful illusion of control. So the question is, how much have you been influenced by all these control myths? The questionnaire on the following pages will help you find out. Chapter 2. Vicious Cycles. Michelle has tears streaming down her eyes. "What's wrong with me?" she asks. "I have a great husband, great kids, a great job. I'm fit, I'm healthy. We have a lovely house. We're well off. We live in a beautiful area. So why aren't I happy?" It's a good question. Michelle seems to have everything she wants in life. So what's going wrong? We'll come back to Michelle later in this chapter. But for now, let's take a look at what's happening in your life. What's your problem? Presumably, if you're reading this book, there's room for your life to work better than it does. Maybe your relationship is in trouble, or you're lonely or heartbroken. Maybe you hate your job, or maybe you've lost it. Maybe your health is deteriorating. Maybe someone you love has died, or rejected you, or moved far away. Maybe you're having a midlife crisis. Maybe you have low self-esteem, or no self-confidence, or feelings of inadequacy. Maybe you have drug or alcohol problems or other addictions. It could be financial or legal difficulties, or that you just feel stuck and don't know what you want. Maybe you're suffering from depression or anxiety, or you could just be bored with life or feel that it lacks any meaning. Whatever the problem is, it undoubtedly gives rise to unpleasant thoughts and feelings, and you've probably spent a lot of time and effort trying to escape them or blot them out. But suppose those attempts to get rid of your bad thoughts and feelings are actually lowering the quality of your life. In ACTI, we have a saying for this: the solution is the problem. How does a solution become a problem? What do you do when you have an itch? You scratch it, right? And usually this works so well you don't even think about it. Scratch the itch and it goes away. Problem solved. But suppose one day you develop a patch of eczema, a common skin condition. The skin is very itchy, so naturally you scratch it. However, the skin cells in this region are already inflamed and therefore highly sensitive, and when you scratch them, they release chemicals called histamines, which are highly irritating, and these histamines inflame the skin even further. So after a little while, the itch returns, with a greater intensity than before. And of course, if you scratch it again, it gets even worse. The more you scratch, the worse the eczema and the bigger the itch. Scratching is a good solution for a fleeting itch in normal, healthy skin. But for a persistent itch in abnormal skin, scratching is harmful. The solution becomes part of the problem. This is commonly known as a vicious cycle. And in the world of human emotions, vicious cycles are common. Here are a few examples. Joseph fears rejection, so he feels overly anxious in social situations. He doesn't want those feelings of anxiety, so he avoids socializing whenever possible. He doesn't accept invitations to parties. He doesn't pursue friendships. He lives alone and stays home every night. This means that on the rare occasion when he does socialize, he's more anxious than ever because he's so out of practice. Furthermore, living alone with no friends or social life just serves to make him feel completely rejected, which is the very thing he fears. Yvonne also feels anxious in social situations. She copes with this by drinking heavily. In the short term, alcohol reduces her anxiety, but the next day she feels hungover and tired, and she often regrets the money she spent on alcohol, or worries about the embarrassing things she did while under the influence. Sure, she escapes anxiety for a little while, but the price she pays is a lot of other unpleasant feelings over the long term. And if she ever finds herself in a social situation where she can't drink, her anxiety is greater than ever, because she doesn't have alcohol to rely on. Danielle is overweight and hates it, so she eats some chocolate to cheer herself up. For the moment, she feels better. But then she thinks about all the calories she's just consumed, and how that will add to her weight, and ends up feeling more miserable than ever. Ahmed is out of shape. He wants to get fit again. He starts working out, but because he's unfit, it's hard work, and it feels uncomfortable. He doesn't like the discomfort, so he stops working out. Then his fitness level slides even lower. There's a lot of built-up tension between Andrew and his wife, Sylvana. Sylvana is angry at Andrew because he works long hours and doesn't spend enough time with her. Andrew doesn't like those feelings of tension in the house, so in order to avoid them, he starts working longer hours. But the more hours he works, the more dissatisfied Sylvana gets, and the tension in their relationship steadily increases. You can see that these are all examples of trying to get rid of, avoid, or escape from unpleasant feelings. We call these control strategies because they are attempts to directly control how you feel. The table on the following page shows some of the most common control strategies. I've organized them into two main categories: fight strategies and flight strategies. Fight strategies involve fighting with or trying to dominate your unwanted thoughts and feelings. Flight strategies involve running away or hiding from those unwelcome thoughts and feelings. The problem with control. What's the problem with using methods like these to try to control your thoughts and feelings? The answer is nothing, if you use them only in moderation. You use them only in situations where they can work. Using them doesn't stop you from doing the things you value. If you're not too distressed or upset, if you're just dealing with run-of-the-mill, everyday stress, then deliberate attempts to control your thoughts and feelings aren't likely to be a problem. In some situations, distraction can be a good way of dealing with unpleasant emotions. If you've just had a row with your partner and you're feeling hurt and angry, it could be helpful to distract yourself by going for a walk or burying your head in a book until you calm down. And sometimes zoning out can be beneficial. For example, if you're stressed and drained after a grueling day's work, falling asleep on the couch may be just the ticket to help you rejuvenate. However, control methods become problematic when you use them excessively. You use them in situations where they can't work. Using them stops you from doing the things you truly value. Using control excessively. To varying degrees, every one of us uses control strategies. I mean, who wouldn't prefer to do without some of the less enjoyable thoughts and feelings that crop up from time to time? And as we've seen, used in moderation, such attempts at control are no big deal. For instance, when I'm feeling particularly anxious, I sometimes eat a bar of chocolate or some biscuits. This is basically a form of distraction, an attempt to avoid some unpleasant feeling by focusing on something else. But because I don't do it excessively, it doesn't create a major problem in my life. I maintain a healthy weight, and I don't give myself diabetes. Now, when I was in my early 20s, it was a different story. Back then, I ate a truckload of cakes and chocolates to try to avoid my anxiety. On a bad day, I could go through 5 whole packets of Tim Tams. And as a result, I became seriously overweight and developed high blood pressure. It was exactly the same control strategy, but when I used it excessively, it clearly had serious consequences. If you're worried about upcoming exams, you may try to distract yourself from the anxiety by watching television. Now that's fine if you're only doing it every now and then, but if you do it too much, you'll spend all your evenings watching television, and you won't get any studying done. This, in turn, will create more anxiety as your studies lag further and further behind. Therefore, as a method for anxiety control, distractions simply can't work in the long run. And then there's the obvious. Dealing with your anxiety in this way prevents you from doing the one thing that would be genuinely helpful: studying. The same goes for zoning out with alcohol or drugs. Moderate drinking or taking the occasional tranquilizer isn't likely to have serious long-term consequences. But if such control methods become a crutch, it can easily lead to addiction, which then creates all sorts of complications, giving rise to even more painful feelings. Notice that there is considerable overlap between these control strategies. Watching television instead of studying can be not only a distraction, but also a hiding, escaping strategy, hiding or escaping from your studies. And television can also be used for zoning out. Some people may sit in front of the tally for hours on end, watching without any genuine interest, trying to use control in situations where it can't work. If you love somebody deeply and you lose that relationship, whether through death, rejection, or separation, you will feel pain. That pain is called grief. Grief is a normal emotional reaction to any significant loss, whether a loved one, a job, or a limb. There's no way to avoid or get rid of it. It's just there. And once accepted, it will pass in its own time. Unfortunately, many of us refuse to accept grief. We will do anything rather than feel it. We may bury ourselves in work, drink heavily, throw ourselves into a new relationship on the rebound, or numb ourselves with prescribed medications. But no matter how hard we try to push grief away, deep down inside it's still there. And eventually, it will be back. It's like holding a football underwater. As long as you keep holding it down, it stays beneath the surface. But eventually your arm gets tired, and the moment you release your grip, the ball leaps straight up out of the water. Donna was 25 years of age when her husband and child died in a tragic car crash. Naturally, she felt an enormous sense of loss, an explosion of painful feelings, including sadness, anger, fear, loneliness, and despair. But Donna could not accept those painful feelings, and she turned to alcohol to push them away. Getting drunk would temporarily soothe her pain. But once she sobered up, her grief returned with a vengeance, and then she'd drink even more to push it away again. By the time Donna came to see me 6 months later, she was knocking back 2 bottles of wine a day, as well as some Valium and sleeping tablets. The single biggest factor in her recovery was her willingness to stop running away from her pain. Only when she opened herself to her feelings and accepted them as a natural part of the grieving process was she able to come to terms with her terrible loss. This enabled her to grieve effectively for her loved ones and channel her energy into building a new life. Later in the book, we'll look at how she accomplished that. When using control stops us from doing what we value. What do you cherish most in life? Health, work, family, friends, religion, sport, nature. It's no surprise that life is richer and more fulfilling when we actively invest our time and energy in the things that are most important or meaningful to us. Yet all too often our attempts to avoid unpleasant feelings get in the way of doing what we truly value. For example, suppose you are a professional actor and you love your work. Then, one day, quite out of the blue, you develop an intense fear of failure just as you are due to appear on stage. So you refuse to go on, a malady commonly known as stage fright. Refusing to go on stage may well reduce your fear temporarily, but it also stops you from doing something you truly value. Or suppose you've just gone through a divorce. Sadness, fear, and anger are all natural reactions, but you don't want to have these unpleasant feelings. So you try to lift your mood by eating junk food, getting drunk, or chain-smoking cigarettes. But what does this do to your health? I've never met anyone who didn't value their health, and yet many people use control strategies that actively damage their physical bodies. How much control do we actually have? The degree of control we have over our thoughts and feelings depends largely on how intense they are. The less intense the feelings, the more we can control them. For instance, if we're just dealing with the typical everyday stresses, a simple relaxation technique can make us feel calmer right away. However, the more troubling our thoughts and feelings are, the less effective our attempts at control will be. If you're terrified, no relaxation technique known to humanity will calm you. We also have more control over our thoughts and feelings when the things that we're avoiding aren't too important. For example, if you're avoiding cleaning your messy garage or your car, then it's probably fairly easy to take your mind off it. Why? Because in the larger scheme of things, it's simply not that important. If you don't do it, the sun will still rise tomorrow, and you will continue to draw breath. All that will happen is that your garage or car will remain messy. But suppose you suddenly developed a large, suspicious-looking black mole on your arm, and you avoid going to the doctor. Would it be easy to take your mind off it? Sure, you could go to a movie, watch television, or surf the internet, and maybe, for a little while, you could stop thinking about it. But in the long term, you will inevitably start thinking about that mole, because the consequences of not taking action are potentially serious. So because many of the things we avoid are not that important, and because many of our negative thoughts and feelings are not that intense, we find that our control strategies can often make us feel better, at least for a little while. Unfortunately, though, they can give us a false sense of confidence. That is, we start to believe that we have much more control than we actually do. And this false sense of control is only compounded by the myths we encountered in the last chapter. What has control got to do with the happiness trap? The happiness trap is built through ineffective control strategies. In order to feel happy, we try hard to control what we're feeling. But these control strategies have 3 significant costs. 1. They take up a lot of time and energy and are usually ineffective in the long run. 2. We feel silly, defective, or weak-minded because the thoughts, feelings we're trying to get rid of keep coming back. 3. Many strategies that decrease unpleasant feelings in the short term actually lower our quality of life over the long term. These unwanted outcomes lead to more unpleasant feelings, and thus even more attempts to control them. It's a vicious cycle. Psychologists have a technical term for this inappropriate or excessive use of control strategies: experiential avoidance. Experiential avoidance means the tendency to keep trying to avoid, change, or get rid of your unwanted thoughts and feelings, even when doing so is harmful, costly, useless, or destructive. Experiential avoidance is a major cause of depression, anxiety, drug and alcohol addiction, eating disorders, and a vast number of other psychological problems. So here is the happiness trap in a nutshell. To find happiness, we try to avoid or get rid of bad feelings, but the harder we try, the more bad feelings we create. It's important to get a sense of this for yourself, to trust your own experience, rather than simply believing what you read. So with this in mind, take a moment to complete the following sentence. The thoughts/feelings I'd most like to get rid of are. Once you've got your answer, take a few minutes to write a list of every single thing you've tried in order to avoid, change, or get rid of these unpleasant thoughts or feelings. Try to remember every single strategy you have ever used, whether deliberately or by default. Don't try to edit or troubleshoot your answers. The goal is to come up with as many examples as possible, such as avoiding situations where the feeling occurs, using drugs or alcohol, taking prescription medications, criticizing or chastising yourself, going into denial, blaming others, using visualization or self-hypnosis, reading self-help books, seeing a therapist, using positive affirmations, procrastination, praying, talking it through with friends, writing in your diary, smoking cigarettes, eating more, eating less, sleeping more, sleeping less, putting off important changes or decisions, throwing yourself into work/socializing/hobby/exercise, or telling yourself it will pass. Once you've done that, go through your list and for each item, ask yourself, 1. Did it get rid of my painful thoughts and feelings in the long term? 2. What did it cost me in time, energy, money, and health and vitality? 3. Did it bring me closer to a rich, full, and meaningful life? You probably discovered 4 things while doing this exercise. 1. You've put a lot of time and effort into trying to change, get rid of, or escape from unpleasant thoughts and feelings. 2. Most of the control strategies you've tried have not lessened your painful thoughts and feelings in the long term. 3. Many of these control strategies have taken a toll. 4. Many of these control strategies have actually taken you further away from the life you would ideally like to have. Feeling a bit dazed, confused, or disturbed? If so, good. This is a major shift in your reality, one that challenges many deeply entrenched beliefs. Strong reactions are quite normal. Of course, if your control strategies have not had significant costs, or if they have brought you closer to the life you want, then they are not problematic, and we don't need to focus on them. In ACT, we are only concerned about the control strategies that put a drag on your quality of life in the long run. Wait a moment, I hear you say. Why haven't you talked about things like giving to charity, or working diligently, or caring for your friends? Isn't giving to others supposed to make people happy? Good point. Bear in mind that it's not just the things you do that matter. It's also your motivation for doing them. If you're giving to charity to push away thoughts that you're selfish, or you're throwing yourself into work to avoid feelings of inadequacy, or you're caring for your friends to counteract fears of rejection, then chances are you won't get much satisfaction out of those activities. Why not? Because when your primary motivation is the avoidance of unpleasant thoughts and feelings, this drains the joy and vitality from what you are doing. For example, recall the last time you ate something rich and tasty to try to stop feeling stressed, or bored, or unhappy. Chances are it wasn't all that satisfying. However, did you ever eat that very same food, not to get rid of bad feelings, but purely and simply to enjoy it and appreciate its taste? I bet you found that much more fulfilling. Great advice about how to improve your life comes at you from all directions. Find a meaningful job, do this great workout, connect with friends and family, get out in nature, take up a hobby, join a club, contribute to a charity, learn new skills, get involved in your community, and so on. And all these activities can be deeply satisfying if you do them, because they are genuinely important and meaningful to you. But if these activities are used mainly to dodge unpleasant thoughts and feelings, chances are they won't be very rewarding. It's hard to appreciate life when you're running away from something threatening. Remember Michelle, who seems to have everything she wants in life, and yet she's not happy. Michelle's life is driven by avoiding feelings of unworthiness. She is plagued by thoughts like, I'm a lousy wife. Why am I so inadequate? And nobody likes me. Along with all the accompanying feelings of guilt, anxiety, frustration, and disappointment. Michelle works hard to make those thoughts and feelings go away. She pushes herself to excel at her job, frequently working late to accommodate others. She dotes on her husband and kids, and caters to their every whim. She tries to please everyone in her life, always putting their needs in front of her own. The toll this takes on her is enormous. And does it get rid of those upsetting thoughts and feelings? You guessed it. By continually putting herself last, and working so hard to win others' approval, she merely reinforces her sense of unworthiness. She is well and truly stuck in the happiness trap. How do I escape the happiness trap? Increasing your self-awareness is the first step. Notice all the little things you do each day to dodge, change, or blot out unpleasant thoughts and feelings. And when you find yourself using these control strategies, notice the consequences. Keep a journal, or spend a few minutes each day reflecting on this. The faster you can recognize when you're stuck in the trap, the faster you can lift yourself out of it. Does this mean you just have to put up with bad feelings and resign yourself to a life of pain and misery? Not at all. In part 2 of this book, you will learn a radically different way of handling unwelcome thoughts and feelings. You'll discover how to take away their power so they can't hurt you, how to rise above them instead of getting crushed by them. You'll learn how to let them go rather than struggle with them, and you will learn how to see them in a new light, so they cease to be the frightening phantoms of old. But don't rush. Before reading on, take a few days. Notice your attempts at control and how they are working for you. Learn to see the trap for what it is, and look forward to the changes soon to come.